is our speaker, Dr. Ronald Stockton, who is the founding director of the Michigan Committee on U.S.-Arab Relations. He's also a principal investigator on the Detroit Arab American Study, one of two studies. That study produced a vast data set and team-authored book, Citizenship and Crisis, Arab Detroit After 9/11, which is from 2009, which he produced some chapters. Dr. Stockton has also written articles in the Middle East Journal, Middle East Policy, Journal of Palestine Studies, and he's also written a book, chapter on ethnic archetypes of the Arab image in cartoons and comic books. So today he's going to talk to us about Muslim graves in southern Michigan. We've just been having discussion about all sorts of things like Albanian gravestones and whether Albanian Christians are buried separately from Albanian Muslims. Apparently they're not. And so we'll have more information about what gravestones can tell us. Thank you for coming.
Great, thank you. I think I will stand up. That sounds better. If you look at the things I've written and published, I started by studying Arabs, and then I suddenly realized that there's a lot of Muslims who are not Arabs. So I went beyond that. I have a long-standing interest in graveyards from my own personal experience and history. And I decided about a decade ago to try to find, I set out with some Muslim students, and I tried to find every place in southeast Michigan where Muslims are buried. And I knew some, but I thought there's got to be a lot more out there that I don't know about. So we started out, and in the end, we found 31 cemeteries or cemetery subsections where Muslims are buried. In a big cemetery like Woodmere in the Detroit area, you got 200,000 graves. So people contract to subsections. The Bektashis will have a group. The Chittagong Pakistanis will have a group. There'll be subgroups. All the Albanians, the Bosnians, they all have subgroups. So we found 31 different places. Plus, in the last month, I found 2 more. Isn't that amazing? There's a lot more out there. I focused on the immediate Detroit area. I haven't gone to the distant areas. I found people from 25 countries or sub-countries with distinctive identities, or former countries. Hyderabad was once a country. I don't know if you know that. South Yemen was once a country. Now there's just Yemen. So some countries disappeared. I found 9 religious or cultural subgroupings. We tend to think of Islam as a single group, but in fact, Islam is a very diverse cultural and religious sub-traditions. We have about 80 mosques in the Detroit area now, but in the end, in the beginning, there were about 4. And so I'm going to tell you about those 4 mosques and their founders who are now departed. So I have their gravestones for you. I reached a couple conclusions. First, these are not Islamic stones, they're Muslim stones. By that I mean, Islam is a religion, but Muslims are individuals. And so Muslims are the ones who decide what their stone is going to be. So a lot of these stones are the stones of individuals who have chosen what they want to put. Sometimes it's religious, sometimes it's not. Your gravestone is not about death. A gravestone is about your life. Who were you? What was important to you? How do you want to be remembered? That's what your gravestone is about. It's about your life. And it's about, you find in a graveyard history, you find art, you find culture, you find religion, you find family, you find wisdom, you find pride, arrogance, humility, love, regret, and joy, and a whole bunch of other things that I probably didn't mention. I'll give you a couple of conclusions. I always tell my students, look for what surprises you, what is different from what you thought. And there's a couple things that surprised me. First, I was surprised by the level of patriotism, that is American patriotism. You'll find a lot of people who proudly put that they were veterans, they served their country. And that kind of surprised me given the propaganda that Muslims are not patriotic Americans. It's not true. I showed this once in Dearborn, and somebody said, maybe they're just kind of catering to anti-Muslim people, and my friend Ishmael Ahmed, who is the founder of the Arab American National Museum and knows more about Detroit than anybody else around, said, you know, we put on an exhibit once when they were creating the Arab American National Museum about a decade ago. He said, we put on an exhibit of what was, do any of you have artifacts from your family that you would like to donate, and we're going to make an exhibit. He said, we were overwhelmed with medals and insignia. Military things were the things that we got most often. And he said, we put on a whole exhibit of Arab American military patriotism. And he said, we had a greater turnout for that exhibit than for any exhibit that we've ever had in the history of the museum. So this is sincere, I think. A second thing I learned is that the old principle is that we learn from our neighbors. When you're an immigrant, you come here, you've got your traditions and your culture, the way they did things in the old country, and then you see something that your neighbors are doing and you say, hey, that's kind of nice, you know? You see a gravestone and it says, dear mom, you're the best mom ever, we'll always love you. And when your mom dies, you say, well, you know, that's so nice, let's put that on our mom's gravestone. So we adapt to the culture that we find around us. I'm going to walk you through some stones, and I've got probably 1,500 stones that I've photographed, and I've done a photo exhibit of these, and it's been displayed at 4 different institutions. And so what I'm going to do is walk you through some of these. There are 4 sort of legendary imams, each of whom left behind a mosque, an institution. There are other individuals who are prominent. This is Imam Shiri. He's the first significant Shia imam. He founded the Islamic Center of America, the biggest mosque in America, which is right across from my campus. This is his grave site. There was a big debate about whether they should spend all that money to build this big thing or build him a modest gravestone and give the rest to charity. In the end, they thought that this won out. Notice down there's a picture of him. This is very significant because in the past that would have been defaced. I'll talk to you about that. One of the things you see is that this is a community in transition. That is the way the parents did it, and the way the young people do it is very different. So you're seeing evolving patterns. Okay, I'll get it right. These are 3 other imams. Over here on the right is Imam Karub, who was, he was probably the first prominent imam, and he is called the leader of Islam in North America. He was Sunni. He was from Lebanon, as Imam Shiri was. Look at the spelling of his name. I thought that was probably somebody in Ellis Island got the name wrong, but in fact he named his son exactly the same. So Hussein is spelled.
Because in Arabic it's Kharub. Well, the last name is Kharub.
It should have an H.
Yeah, so but I mean, whatever. We don't have
Yeah. Down here is Imam Vebi, who is the leader of the Albanians. And he had a great adjustment problem when he came here. His father had been the head of Islam in the Islamic community in Albania, and he was from a very elite environment. He came here, he found all these working class Albanians who ran Coney Islands and worked in the factories and whatever. He didn't know how to adjust to them, and he had to spend some time adjusting to his congregation. This is this one up above. This is quite fascinating. It's the Bektashis. The Bektashis are a group of people who were originally Turks. They're Sufis. They got run out of Turkey when the Turks crushed the Janissaries. They were advisors of the Janissaries, that elite military force. And he's the founder of the Bektashi community in the Detroit area in North America, and he has this amazing shrine to his life. In the early days, if you go back 100 years, Ottoman Empire was an empire, and it included a lot of other people who were not ethnic Turks as we would know them today. There's a woman named Barbara Belgay. She's now gone, but she did a study of I think 20,000 different Turks. If you today are Turks, or if you know Turks, Turks come to this country today in families. They're technically skilled. They're usually doctors or engineers or whatever they are. They come in groups. They're well educated. In the early days, they were almost all single men. They were working class. Many of them didn't read, and very few of them got married. And of those who got married, most married Christian women, which means that, as Barbara Bilgay says, they've vanished. You're not going to find anybody who's a descendant of these people, because if they had a Christian wife, probably the kids grew up Christian, they don't identify as Turkish, and so you don't have this. This is, they live together, men and women, and, men and men, and here you see someone, dear friend, and born in Turkey. Not much else, you know, a little religious passage on the top there, and that's about it. These are the Albanians, and I think something you have to remember about the Albanians is that they were Albanians well before they were Muslims. They're the ancient Illyrians, so to them, being in Albania is the core of their identity. So you will always find that Albanian flag, which interestingly is borrowed from the Christian empire, which faced both directions. And the Ottomans adopted that two-facing, it was the two faces of Christianity, now it's the two faces of the empire. And look down here, this is the mosque in Tirana. It's a fairly modest mosque. Sometimes you will always see the emblem, you will sometimes see the mosque, and a large number of these people are from Kosovo. I don't know why that is, but there's a large number of Albanians who are from Kosovo. Here is a group, Crimean Turks. I didn't even know we had those in Detroit. I was in a program with someone and who was Turkish, and she said, "Oh, we're Crimeans." And I said, "You're Crimeans?" She says, "Yeah, we got a graveyard." And I said, "You have a graveyard? Whoa, you're my best friend." And so here you see Crimea's in the news now because of all the controversies. Here they use the star and crescent. That is not a religious symbol. It's a Turkish, an Ottoman symbol. So people think it's Islamic, but it's not. Over here is the symbol of the Crimean flag. And you notice here, the Bismillah is in Turkish, no, it's not in Latin script, it's a Turkish script there. And down here you see recite the Fatiha. This is something that people who are not Muslims, you go to a graveyard and you'll see somebody standing there like this. They come walking up, they stand like this, they pray, and then they leave. And you say, "Wait, you just left. You know, you were only there 3 minutes. Why are you there?" The purpose of going to a graveyard is to pray over the grave, and then you can leave. If you go to a Hispanic graveyard in Tucson, where my son lives, go to a Mexican grave, what you'll see is people bring chairs and benches and picnic basket, and they sit there for a couple of hours visiting with their grandparents. So customs vary a lot, but very often it'll say recite the Fatiha. That's the opening of the Quran, which most of you would know that. This is Bosnians. There's an old Bosnian population in Detroit going back 100 years, but these are the new Bosnians, and many of them are refugees from the wars that happened. A couple things about these. Look at this. This is flat. That's a male stone. This is round. It's a female stone. And look at this. They have footstones. Americans typically don't have footstones. I've seen those in the South, but typically Americans don't have footstones. And look down here at this. This thing is only about 25 years old. I was out there with one of my friends who's a Muslim, and he said, "Wait, there's something wrong with this." Well, indeed, there's something wrong with this. Look at this. It's 90 degrees. This is not properly aligned. This is not aligned. You can't have 90-degree, graves 90 degrees to each other. They got to be facing Mecca. So you will lie down on your right side. You should be facing Mecca. And many of the early burial sites were not aligned. They're just like the United States. The road twists around. You just get buried along the road, whatever that path is. People ask me, what's a typical Muslim stone? There isn't such a thing as a typical Muslim stone, but this is a common style. Here you'll see the affirmation of God, and in Arabic and English. Someone's left a rock. They'll have calligraphy on the side. It'll say Muhammad. It will say Fatiha. It will say what else would I say? The smell, the Shahada, or passage from Al-Fajr, which is the dawn, and tells about the judgment day. Afghans, again, there were Afghans in the Detroit area 100 years ago. Many of them are Pashtuns. They identify as Pashtuns, and that's, of course, the key ethnic group, and the Taliban is based among the Pashtuns. Look at this person. He identifies himself as Afghanistan. Many of them will say Pashtun. Inventor of the swim float. I love it. That guy thought he was wanted to go down historically. And this is not put there. That flag is not put there by the Graveyard Association. It's put there by probably a family member. This was not. Sometimes on Veterans Day they'll go around and stick flags on everybody who's known to be a veteran. This was not Veterans Day. Just somebody had done.
Actually, the inventor of the swim float?
Pardon me?
Is he the actual inventor of the swim float?
Well, I don't know. He says that. I'm not going to dispute it. Swim float, it's floaty, you know, that's what little kids have, right? This just electrified me when I found this. Look at this. I found this about 10 years ago, and there was all this controversy about the images of Muhammad and that sort of thing. So look at this. Here you have the Holy Family, there's Muhammad, there's Ali, there's Fatima, and the two little boys, Hassan and Hussein. And if you know anything, you know this is Shia, right? These are the Shia. Look down here. You've got the sword Zulfikar with 2 points, and it says there is no hero like Ali. There is no sword like Zulfikar, and so it's the sword of truth and justice, that sort of thing. Look at a couple things about this. First, they've got halos. What the Saudis will tell you is that this is clear indication that the Shia are compromised by Christianity. They're not real Muslims. And look, Muhammad's, all the faces are blotted out, but look, Muhammad, you can see the outline of his beard, right? His face is outlined. Ali, you can see his beard. The little boys, you can see this. But Fatima's completely covered over. You can't see anything. A few feet away, there was a grave of a family that had died from toxic poisoning. They got radon poisoning out of their house, you know, and the husband died, I think, and maybe the wife, I'm not sure. But they had this, look at this. Here once again is Zulfikar. There's Ali, look at that. An actual image. I showed this in one of my Shia students says, we have exactly that picture on the wall in our living room. And what the Shia imams have ruled is that an image like this is not idolatry, and it's not actually Ali. It's actually it's similar to the Catholic logic that when you genuflect to a statue, you're not worshiping a statue. The statue represents Mary or whatever it is, and you're genuflecting to the honor of this woman and her contribution to the faith. So the Shia allow this. The Sunnis absolutely do not. They would think that was quite offensive. And there's the evil eye, which is a Turkish Ottoman custom. It has nothing to do with religion, but you know, people think it does. Okay, I'm just looking for the oldest immigrant to be buried in America. I think there are probably a lot of immigrants who came here in the 1800s and then went back to Lebanon or wherever they were from. But I'm looking for somebody who was really an early immigrant. We Americans are the world's greatest experts on immigration. We've been studying it for 400 years, since the first person arrived and then the second person arrived, and they said, who are these people? And so we've been doing that. And what we know is that basically immigration is what young people do. Old people don't immigrate. Young people immigrate. And so 30, maybe 40, very few people above 40 immigrate. So if you find someone who was born in 1865, it's probable that person was in the country by 1895 or 1900, probably. And so that's a very early arrival. And here is 1851. That person might be even older. And I'm thinking that Mr. Mansour is probably the first that I have found, the earliest immigrant that I have found who's buried here. Oh, I like this one. You know why I put that in? Because I like the stone and I can do whatever I want. It's my lecture. So I put that in. But there's another reason. Look at this. In the early days, they put images on the stones. But people who are these strict religious types would come around and deface the stones because they thought that was idolatry. And But what did I show you earlier? Imam Shiri has his picture on his grave. Nobody's defaced that. These traditions evolve. By the way, you'll see the same thing in Jewish cemeteries. You'll see faces that have been defaced, images that have been defaced. This is kind of nice. Look at that. Again, somebody tore that off. And this is in Istanbul. And this is the, look at this, how many, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of those. This person wanted to remember, what do you want to remember? You know what's important to you? He wanted to remember Istanbul. He's probably from Istanbul. He's probably been there a lot of times when he was a little boy. This is what's called a your death statement. People who study graveyards say there's a what's called a your death statement. It's a statement, our beloved wife, mother, grandmother, our hearts still ache in sadness and secret tears still flow. What it means to lose you, no one will ever know. So this is a statement by the survivors to the dead person that we will always miss you. And so that's called a your death statement. I think this woman is Iranian, but I'm not sure. Here's another your death statement. You left us with a pain so deep, you left us with a scar in our hearts, you left us with unforgettable memories, you left us but you are still here, you left us and we still can't let go. Daddy, it's not the end but the beginning, adored husband, cherished father, idealized leader. Okay, you know what? This is so American. You're not going to go back to the old country and find this kind of a passage. This is very much, you know, as I said, you learn from your neighbors. You know, somebody else says, Dad, we'll miss you forever, and they write a little poem, and the daughters here write a little poem and say, farewell, Dad. Now, this is another kind of message. It's called Message from the Grave. Feel my faith in you when you can't find your own, and always remember you're never alone. So this is a mother reassuring her children and survivors that my memory of me will sustain you when you have a bad time. Here's a poem that I think probably sounds better in Farsi, but it got translated into English. Let me see if I can read it. A flower missing, sorrows grow, Ahmed peaceful, such harsh time, heaven walls golden, gates shall open, Lord has chosen. This is, I think probably in Farsi that sounds beautiful, but in English it makes the point anyway. Here's another one I found, just found this one a few weeks ago, a passage by, listen to this, this is so unusual, and this apparently is an authentic Iranian passage by Rumi. I have again and again grown like grass. I have experienced 770 worlds. I have died from minerality and become vegetable. And from my vegetativeness, I died and became animal. I died from animal and became man. Then why fear disappearance through death? Next time I shall die, bringing forth wings and feathers like angels. After that, soaring higher than angels. What you cannot imagine, I shall be that. Isn't that amazing? It's an amazing passage. Here we see just, farewell, we'll miss you forever. And then people have put these shells around. The shells have no significance at all, except they're pretty. And somebody liked them, so that's good. I'm okay with that. Here's George Mansour. In the early days, there was a lot of mistakes on stones. You know, the letters would be upside down. The carvers were not Muslims, they didn't know anything, and so I can think of two reasons why this might be so. One is that the carver just got confused and put something backward or whatever. The other is that the person who wrote up, because the carver just goes from what you've written up, and the person writing it up may have done it this way rather than the conventional way that we would use. But
I have a question. It says George, but in Arabic it's Ajaj. I didn't know this word.
what does it say in Arabic?
Ajaj, Ali Mansour, which makes him Muslim. George makes him Christian.
Isn't that interesting? George is a Christian saint.
Right.
I don't know. I know the Mansours in the Detroit area, they're Christians and Muslims, so I don't know. Maybe Daddy was green and Mama was orange. I don't know. Look at this one. Azerbaijanis. This is something I think I've detected. That there's no Azerbaijani community around the Detroit area that I know of. I've never heard of them. I've only had one student who was an Azeri from Baku. I had a couple of Jewish students from Baku, but not Muslim students. These people are from Monroe. That's about 50 miles south, right on the Ohio border. And why are they buried in Detroit? We have two old cemeteries where Muslims are buried. We have a new cemetery. By new, I mean like 30 years ago. And it's mostly Shia. But what you're seeing is that is one of the most interesting cemeteries because they're doing things that are really new. You don't have the old style, you got new style. And what I think is happening is people, it's Shia mostly, it was founded by Imam Shiri, but what you're seeing is that people who live in Keokuk, Iowa, and they don't want to be buried in the Keokuk cemetery where they'd be the only Muslim, they bring their body back. So in a sense, Detroit has become a virtual homeland. It's a concept I've kind of thought about, this is a virtual homeland for it. Now, Catholics and Jews have baby sections in their graveyards. As a rule, Muslims and Protestants do not. But in Detroit, one of my friends, Naja Bazi, who's a nurse, discovered that there were a bunch that when there was a miscarriage, they would just dispose of the embryo or fetus. And she thought, in Islam, they're supposed to be buried. So she decided to create a baby section, and she called it Tots for Plots. And she's fantastic at fundraising. You can't refuse her. She knows how to get money. So they bought this empty section in an old graveyard and dedicated it to babies. And so here we see a lot of people are wealthy, and a lot of people just don't have any money. And so this is open to anybody. And here are two stones that are basically wooden. People didn't have enough money. Look at this one. Somebody carved that out and then forgot an A, and they had to stick that in because they missed it. And look here, we've got little ducks. This little kid probably played with little rubber duckies.
So is that for only miscarriages or all?
No, it's for anybody, any child. It's any child, yeah. She founded it as a burial place for people for miscarriages, but she also founded it for poor people who couldn't afford to be in the regular graveyard. Okay, look at this. I like this a lot. This is one of the earlier graveyards. It's got this little child. He was 7. Holy Quran. That's so American, I tell you again. In the 19th century, you had Holy Bible, and I can imagine somebody came in and said, "That is so nice. Why don't we say Holy Quran?" And so there you see this, and a very American thing. Look on the side there. 2 angels. Again, the Saudis would be very upset. You're not supposed to have angels. That's considered. They're like the Puritans who thought angels were representations of angels who were idolatrous. And then 2 little prayers. Suffer the little children. This is a passage from Jesus when he says, suffer the little children to come unto me. And but he's an Islamic prophet, so no problem there. Now look at this other one now. Now I lay me down to sleep. That is a Protestant prayer. That is the prayer that I said as a little boy. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. Look at this. They don't care. They say, that's okay. It's good. It's a prayer to God. So that's good. So this is so Christian, so American, and yet it's also authentically Islamic in its own way. People overlook the fact that about 20% of all Muslims are African Americans, and the Nation of Islam, they were considered a heretical group until about 25 years or so ago. The new ruler reconciled with Sunni Islam, so they're now considered Muslims. But they're black nationalists. They're black identity. And look at this: in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. Okay, that's the standard invocation. Loving father, grandfather, uncle, Henry Shahid, who was named Vaughn. He was born Vaughn, but he took an Islamic name. And look at this. You've got the Star and Crescent there. Okay. They formed a paramilitary group called the Fruit of Islam, and the original founders of that are called the Pioneers. So this man is a really significant historical person. He was one of the original founders of the Fruit of Islam. And so I just found this in a we have 2 black graveyards, black run graveyards in the Detroit area, and this is in one of them. Here are a couple of other black identity gravestones. Look at this. Altheria Shaker, a believing servant of God, okay. Peace be upon you, okay, standard greeting. What is this? Arrived and departed. This is very African American. African American don't say born, died. They say arrived, departed, or sunrise, sunset. Those are the common things you'll see in a black graveyard. And so that's just typical black culture. What is this? It's not clear. I checked with someone who's a specialist in black graveyards, and he said she might have been Eastern Star. That's a branch of the female branch of the Masons, and she might have been that. Nobody is sure. Look at the name Altheria. That's a term for the Pleiades, and according to an imam that I spoke to about this, he said, there's a hadith. I said, well, there's always a hadith. I didn't say that, but there is always a hadith. Altheria is the Pleiades, and there was an incident in the life of Muhammad when he and his followers were sitting around talking about theological issues, and they believed at the time that the stars were stacked, and the Pleiades were the highest stars. And so he turned and pointed to someone who was a Persian, and he said, you know, if the answer is up in the Pleiades, someone from this man's country will figure it out, meaning that these are the most sophisticated thinkers of the day. So Altheria is a popular term. Now down here, look at this. This one's even more confusing to me anyway. Yale Guy Miller is his name. He's called Nyoma, which is the founder of the Southwest Africa liberation movement when they were fighting to get free of South African control, Southwest Africa. There's an Ankh there. This is not a cross. It's an Egyptian pre-Christian, pre-everything Ankh, and you still see those. Prophet of Truth, that could probably refer to Muhammad, who knows. Look at this, a lion. This person may have been Rastafarian. He's got a very mixed identity. Whatever he is, it's not clear. He's bringing in a lot of symbols which have to do with black identity, but you can't tell exactly where he's getting this and that. And of course, a weeping willow is a sign of mourning, so that's a common symbol. Here's a bench that I saw. Very often you'll see in a bench in a cemetery, and it's for sitting. But in the Muslim community, a bench is put over the grave so that it's a marker so people don't step on the grave, which is a big deal for Muslims. And here is a woman, Catherine Morris, who took the Islamic name Khatun, which means a righteous woman. And dear Kathy, you're always in our hearts, loving wife, mom, aunt, sister, and friend. So she was a mom, but look at the dear auntie. I miss you every moment, miss your kind and loving care, but we know your home is in heaven, and someday we'll meet you there. Where are the daughters or the sons? They're not mentioned. Her children aren't mentioned there. This was in basically a Christian graveyard, and she's buried with her Christian relatives. She was obviously the only person that converted. Again, in your death statement, this is one of the most moving things. The Berry family, you see right there, Mr. and Mrs. Berry, they were immigrants from Lebanon. And she died, Mrs. Berry died first. And then it says, what does it say? Your blessed grave becomes your home, and our silent home, sadly, becomes my grave. What just a sad expression of loss. And then the kids chime in. Dear mother, there will never be another you from your loving children. And then right next to it, just a minute, I gotta find this, wait a minute. I've gotta find what Mr. Berry wrote. He obviously wrote something in advance of his death and said, I want this on my stone, right next to him. This is a big stone, you can kind of tell that. Here is what he wrote on his stone. This is in Arabic. I had to get several people to help me translate this. Poetry doesn't just shift over easily from one language to another. There are too many images. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, the tomb of the author, Sheikh Abdullah Berry. So he starts by saying, I wrote this poem. It was my wish to be buried in the Berry family quarters in Lebanon, to smell the fragrance of the soil sprinkled with dew, to pray the takbir, a prayer to God, perfumed with the glory of renowned people, sages of the village, who have knowledge of the history of my grandfathers and knowledge of our ancestors, and to touch with my soul, albeit being deceased, the breeze of French broom flowers in El Calais, and the drizzle of grapevines in a whiff of fragrant roses sprinkled with dew. I am immigrating to the house of permanence, that is the afterlife, and this afterlife is better and more lasting. I do not know when I will return. That is a really sad. This is what is called the silent sorrows of the immigrant, right? You immigrate, you fit in, you have a job, you have family, you lead your life, but you wake up every morning with a memory of the village where you grew up and a sense of loss. I led a group of students out here once. I got to tell you this story. I led a group of students out here, and I had a young Lebanese student, and she had come. You know, if you come to this country when you're 5 or 6, it's just you're moving with your family, you fit in, you adjust, whatever. If you come when you're 15, that's a trauma, because you got friends, you got classmates, everything, you're leaving them behind, you got to start over. She's one of those. And she fitted in. She was our top student in political science. She was really great. And she went later to Harvard Law School, so, you know, she's a superstar. and one of the other students in the class was a guy from Bosnia who was a refugee, and he had never gotten over what happened to his country. And so we were out there, and I said to her, could you read this? And she started reading it and started crying. And she finished, but after we left that, the guy walked over to her and he said, you know, are you okay? And she said, yeah, I'm an immigrant. And he said, I'm an immigrant too. They walked around together. Anyway, to make a long story short, they started dating, and a year later, exactly 1 year later, he said, you know, it's been a year since we went to that cemetery. Let's go. And they went back to the stone, and he proposed to her. And they're now happily married, and they have a dog. This is interesting. It's a Chinese Muslims. These appear not to be converts. They're what are called Hui. These are Hui. They're a group of people who are. They're not like the ethnic minorities who are the Uyghurs or whatever, who are an ethnic tribal group within China. These are main Han Chinese, and so these people are fully Chinese, and husband and wife side by side. They're Confucians. It says on there, from this village, from this district, from this province, whatsoever. And it says, the great-grandkids put the stone in, they said, with great reverence to and tears in our eyes for our great-grandparents. Very Confucian, but you know what? Confucian is a culture. It's not inconsistent with Islam. You can be full Confucian, you can be a full Muslim at the same time. His name is Hussein. Her name is only in her name in English letters is a Christian name only. I mean, a Western name only. But in Arabic, it says that she's Fatima. So these are the Dawoodi Bohra. When I first visited this 10 years ago, there was just one stone there. The Dawoodi Bohra are a branch of the Ismailis, and there are not very many. They're a merchant community, and they are, as far as I can tell, you know, the Islamic custom is that you should be buried in the ground in a shroud, but most graveyards won't allow that. As far as I can tell, this is the only graveyard. Partially, there's health regulations, like if the water level is high, you can't do it because you might pollute the water level with the body. And that has happened in a few places. But nevertheless, here they're allowed to bury directly into the ground. These things are they're boxes. There are no graves in there. The graves are in the ground, and this is the box which is over the grave. Someone from Guyana. Look at that. Why are we Muslims from Guyana? Who knows? These people are Nigerians. Half of all Nigerians are Muslims, but you don't find any in very many houses in Detroit. I've never run across. I haven't run across many Yoruba. These people are Yoruba in southwest Nigeria. There's a province, and the Yoruba are a mix of Christians and Muslims. And these people are Yorubas. You can kind of tell from their names and from their headdress. They're from western Nigeria. What are they doing here? I think it's virtual community. I seriously doubt that they lived in Detroit. I think they probably lived somewhere else and had their bodies brought here because they wanted to be in a Muslim section. I should have written 5 flags. Okay, let's think about Mr. You know the disintegration of India into 3 countries to start with? India, Pakistan, and Hyderabad. Those were the 3. And then Hyderabad, which is in the very center of India, the Indian Army took care of that and incorporated them. And then Pakistan split into 2, so you got 4 countries in a sense. So this man started out under the British flag, then he was under the Indian flag, then he was under the Hyderabadi flag, and then he moved to where? Pakistan, 4th flag, and then he ended up living in the United States, 5th flag. So this man lived under 5 flags in his life, and exactly when he died in Karachi, they brought his body to Detroit. Well, that's a reversal of the pattern, is it? Where you die in Detroit and they ship you back to wherever you're from. And we have Muslim burial organization, undertakers, who say, we it doesn't quite say we deliver, that sounds like pizza, but they say we ship home, so they'll send you back. This is interesting. Muhammad, that's not MD, that's Muhammad, freedom fighter of Bangladesh, okay? He's chairman of something, I don't know what, loved by all, except probably the Indians, but, and then look at this number up there. I've only seen this number on people who were from India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. In Arabic, it's like Hebrew letters, where every letter has a numerical value. So you can take a passage and come up with a number, and everybody knows what that number refers to, that particular passage or the name or whatever it is. 786 is the number of the Fatiha, the numerical value of the Fatiha. So as I said, you'll often see on a Muslim grave it says pray the Fatiha, or just pray, or Fatiha, it'll say something like that. This is a custom of just saying, say a prayer for my soul. That's what that means. People like to identify themselves where they're from. Al-Bira, Palestine. Al-Bira is a town just north of Jerusalem. There used to be, when I moved to Detroit, there was a large Al-Bira community. You know what they did? There was an Al-Bira social hall. It's still there. They just packed up and all moved. The whole community moved to Cleveland. I don't know why they did that. They just bailed out and decided Cleveland's the way to go. So they moved. And then down here is someone who is a Bosnian, according to my Yugoslav students. This person has got the Bosnian dialect of Serbo-Croatian, so he is a Bosnian. And it says, we who love you in life, love you in death, or something like that. True love, there's a lot of things. Again, more American stuff. I tell you, this is so American. The rings, holding hands, the picture, very often the date of the wedding. I've just done my gravestone in advance. My wife insisted that we have our marriage date on it. Okay, that's good. I'm okay with that. Here's a couple mixed marriages. I saw this Murray, and I thought, okay, these people really adapted their name. But in fact, that's actually their name. It's a simplified version of Meroa, which is it's close to their name. And so here we see Michael and Anna. And it says Holy Quran over here. Michael, his name was probably Mustafa or something, I don't know. And over here is her religious symbol. And Bore, again, Farid from Crimea, and Anna. This was a lesson to me. Okay, let me tell you, for those of us who are sort of old long-term Americans, we have images of immigrants. There are two types of immigrants. One are the group of people who come here and they say, thank God we're in America, this is the greatest country in the world. They become very American, they adapt, they're fully comfortable in this country. Then we have another type of immigrant who comes here and they sort of are here against their will. They wish they were back in the village. They are slow learning English. They don't really identify with this country, etc., etc. This stone completely disabused me of that idea. You can't see it, but every single word on it, there's a lot of words here. Every single word of them is Arabic. There's not a single English word there. Up here, can you see this? Oh, do you see this right there? 3 links of a chain. That means he's a member of the Odd Fellows, which is a service organization. And look what he puts on it. He was a veteran of World War I. That's front and center. This man is a patriotic American, and he's totally an Arab. And as they often say, we exist on both sides of the hyphen. Arab Americans are both Arabs and Americans. They're on both sides. So that kind of taught me a lesson, and not to be too simplistic about these issues. Veterans, Korea, World War I. Look at that. We associate that now with Judaism, don't we, and with Israel. No, that's not what it is. It's just a symbol, and you'll see this. I saw this on a mosque once, in Cairo. The Star of David, it's just double triangles. It's just a symbol, an emblem. Vietnam, Bronze Star, Medal winner, and then look at this. It's a woman. She's a junior officer in the Navy. Look at this. She's got her Star and Crescent. What else is Islamic on there? Nothing. This is interesting. Semper Fi. Ronnie Robert Barry. When I saw this, I thought, okay, 1994. Did this guy die in combat? Where were we fighting in 1994? And I couldn't figure out where he would have died. And I've got a photo exhibit, and his is one of the photos I have up. And someone walked up to me as a former student, and he said, "Oh, I know him." And I said, "You know him? Tell me, what was the circumstances of his death?" He says, "I was actually with his father when his father learned that he had died. He died in a motorcycle accident." But the fact is, his family knew that his military identity, being a Marine, was a really point of pride for him, so they put that on his stone. Clubs and associations. Okay, there are two things. If you go back to the 60s and before, when a person came to this country, a Middle East person came to this country, their friends would tell them two things. Number one, take a nickname. Everybody in America's got a nickname. Take a nickname. If your name is Mustafa, call yourself Mike. Or if your name is Mohammed, tell them your name is Mike. Everybody. And if your name is Ali, just call yourself Al. It's the same thing anyway. And all the Americans do that. And the second thing is, join a club. That will help you get to know Americans and fit in and adapt and adjust. So you go there and you find all of these things. Now today, by the way, the imams tell you don't do any of those things. Keep your name exactly the way it is. If people can't pronounce it, that's their problem. And secondly, don't join those clubs. Join an Islamic association. Don't join the Elks or whatever it is. These are all service organizations. They do good deeds. I have a friend, by the way. His name is Amir. He's from Iraq. And he said, when I came here in the 60s, my friends told me, take an American name. And I said, okay, that's easy. My name means Prince. So he went around and told people, my name is Prince. And he said, some Americans invited me over to their house one night, and we were sitting there at the table. And the dog came up and they said, come here, Prince. And I realized that that's a dog's name. So I went back to being Amir. All sorts of religious symbols that are there. Okay, these are a couple that are kind of interesting. I looked so hard to try to find a Druze graveyard. I contacted my friend who's the former head of the Druze Society, and I said, can you tell me anywhere where Druze are buried? Because I know you have this wonderful star that you have. she couldn't come up with anything. She asked her dad, they couldn't come up with anything. They said, well, somewhere in this graveyard. And I said, oh, come on, you got 100,000 people on it. Can you narrow it down? And no, she couldn't. And I just bumped into this summer. I was out at this graveyard, and the place where they got new, I told you it's the new graves they have there. And I found this. Now these people are not Muslims, but they're part of Muslim culture. Look at this, they're part of the culture. These are the Mandeans. They're a very small group. I don't know what they are. They follow John the Baptist. They're pre-Christian, and they're pre-Islamic. And this is not a Christian cross. It's a pre-Christian cross, and there's a shroud there. And they're just an interesting group that don't quite fit anywhere. We're just about at the end. I want to mention to you the Ahmadiyya. These are a group from India, although they're mostly in Pakistan now. The other Muslims consider them heretics. If an Ahmadiyya person in public says, I am a Muslim, and under Pakistani law they can be arrested for blasphemy. And they were persecuted, as many other Muslims were, when India and Pakistan split. And many people fled. They're from a town in northern India. And the religious leaders asked if a certain number of imams, we might say, would stay behind to serve the needs of the community, those remaining, and to protect the property, protect their mosques. So 313 people stayed behind. Those are considered heroic people to the Ahmadiyya. And this man is identified as number 175 of the 313. So he's a very significant, heroic person in that community. And the Ahmadiyya have a system whereby you can write your will to leave your property to the community, and that's considered a very honorable thing to do. And his wife has left her property to the community, so she's identified also as a very significant person. These are two significant people. And I just discovered this last summer. I was so happy when I discovered this. And just to show you how things change. Talk about, the young generation going off on their own. Here on the left is a guy with his pet cougar. And here on the right is this guy, nice guy, you'd like to know him. Fire made flesh to be reborn from the ashes. And then this symbol right here. So I asked my students, this is what I always do, I got enough expertise in a given classroom. I asked my Muslim students, what the heck does all this mean? So somebody said, I think this is from Game of Thrones. And since I've never watched even one Game of Thrones, I just say, okay, Game of Thrones. But I was walking across my campus the other day, and I saw on the wall this very symbol. It's a phoenix. The bird, the phoenix rising from the ashes, right? And so here you have the ashes. And it's the symbol of a Phi Kappa Phi. I think that's the name of the fraternity. And it's a fraternity that focuses on uplift and excellence and discipline and that sort of thing. So this guy was probably a student somewhere. He was probably very active in this organization, and then he died of whatever the reason was. I'll end with this one. This is one of the most poignant stones that I saw, Baby Victoria. She was born in February 1918 and died in February 19. Nobody knows why she died. Maybe she died from influenza. Maybe she just died. A lot of babies died in those days. It's not even clear. She's buried in a baby section. So there are Christians and Jews and everybody buried in the section. And so it's not even clear. I figured out, who is this little girl? She's named Victoria. That's not a very Muslim name. But after all, maybe the parents liked Victoria, Queen Victoria, and admired that. That's a pretty name. She's named Fatima. She might be Shia, but what I discovered is this name Baez, which is like Joan Baez, right? It's the same name. That's a North African name, probably Moroccan, maybe not. But I checked on the internet. A lot of Baezes converted. They were Muslims. They converted later to Christianity. They were Jews, and the Jews converted to Islam. So, what is she? Is she got a Jewish heritage or what? And in northern Africa, the Fatimids dynasty governed that area, so maybe she's a Shia. Maybe they just named her in honor of that dynasty. Plus, in Portugal, you've got the the Virgin who appeared, Mary appeared at a place called Fatima, so Fatima is the patron saint, not Fatima, the daughter of Muhammad, but Fatima, the mother of God. She appeared in Portugal. It took me a couple years to wander about 50 feet away and find the Baiz family stone, which was very Muslim. They identified as Muslim. So this is a Muslim girl. We can't tell that from her stone. All we can tell is that she had brothers and sisters who loved her. She had parents who loved her. They missed her for the rest of their lives, which are now over. And all that's left is this stone, which reminds us of her existence. So that's that. So I'll be happy to answer whatever questions you have. Yes?
So, excuse me. You mentioned back with some of the organizations and clubs that people are part of.
Right.
It looked like there was like a Shriner or something. Was that?
Yeah, Shriners. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Because the Shriners are, the Shriners were founded by someone who went to Egypt, and they had this ceremony which he thought was bizarre. People with hats, and everything. So he came back and founded an organization which was a burlesque. It's like a parody of Islam. And so these people, they call themselves all sorts of religious titles they give themselves. In fact, what they do is they do a lot of good service work.
Yeah.
They raise money and give it to children's hospitals and children's whatever. So I found a lot of, you might say, why would a Muslim do that? Well, because it's doing good. And if you're a Muslim, you're supposed to do good things. And so they do good things, and you meet a lot of friends, and so what do you care if they wear a funny hat and drive around on a little bicycle, who cares? Yes?
So I'm from Dearborn, actually.
Oh, well, thank you, we should shake hands.
My brother was actually in one of your classes, a world history class.
Who's that?
I don't think you know him, Ali Fawaz.
Ali, there's so many Alis.
I think you've had a lot of students over the years.
Yeah.
Also, my grandmother is a Berry, so I recognized actually a few of those people, and one of them was Nafi Berry, was my uncle's best friend.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like totally, it's like the coolest thing right now. One of the things though that I wanted to ask you is, I have a few questions, but have you ever compared for example, like I think a lot of these gravestones are from the the Plymouth graveyard?
United Memorial Gardens.
Is that the one you referred to?
Yeah, that's the one I referred to as the modern one, that this is like a virtual homeland for people.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm just wondering, if you've ever compared, for example, some of those to what, all of these people are from almost the same village in South Lebanon, and
yes.
if you've ever compared to what the ones
yeah.
over there look like. Because one of my family members was actually on vacation this summer in Lebanon, and one of their children actually passed away, so they actually buried her there, whereas the rest of the family is in the U.S. And I noticed that actually they're almost the same. They look the same to me.
Yeah.
And
have you ever been to Tibnin?
Yeah, this is where I'm referring to.
Yeah,
we buried her in Tibnin.
But you've personally been there?
Yeah, I went to the funeral actually.
Yeah, and what did the stones look like?
They look like the same standard, just smaller. So everything's bigger in America. We have these massive.
They're these big stones, not the small Sunni type, but the big,
full length body,
big flat
full body.
type.
As far as what they say on them, because when my grandparents passed away, we did not personalize the stones. It was okay, everybody is traumatized. Just I think that the funeral homes now, or the gravestone carvers now, just have a standard template, and we were okay, this is the name. She's a grandma. She's a whatever.
Yeah.
And they just made it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think
if you get buried in the United States, you go in to the funeral home, and whoever's making the stone, and they've got a book there. It's 100 pages.
Yeah.
And they'll say, what would you like on the stone? And you say, well, I want the name and the address, and the name and date and whatever. And they'll say, what else do you want? So you can write a slogan. I'll tell you what my gravestone says. I spent a lot of time thinking about this. We were given the gift of time and used it well. See, my wife and I both grew up the children of coal miners, and for us, death was just, death is stalking you. It's just, you just die. That's what happens. And here we are, you know, our ages, and we've really feel lucky because we lived this long. So I put that down. You could put something personal there. They show you all sorts of images that you can put on. You can pick, I think, 2 images for free, and then if you want 3 or 4, you got to pay extra. But there's a list of all of those things. They'll just do it routinely for you.
Yeah.
And have you ever seen a stone in Lebanon which said, "Dearest mother, we will love you forever"?
That's the only difference that I definitely noticed very clearly was that nothing's in English over there. So I didn't take the time to try to read them.
Yeah, I've been told that they don't do that. That's very American, that
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Okay.
Okay, I got a story for you. Quick story, all right? This is 15 or so years ago. There was a student I'd never had before, and someone said, before you graduate, you should go talk to this man. So she came by, and her name was Barry. I've forgotten her first name. So we talked for a while, and I said to her, "So you're from Tibneen?" She said, "How did you know that?"
Everybody is.
And I said, "Oh, it's the Tibneen forehead. You've got a very distinctive forehead." She says, "What?" But I explained to her, everybody knows the Berries are from Tibneen. The Bezis are from Benjabail. And, you know, we in Dearborn figured these things out. I've never been to a Middle Eastern graveyard. I shouldn't say that. I've been to some in Syria, which are totally different. I've been to some in Jerusalem, which are historic graveyards. I haven't been to contemporary graveyards. So, who else has a question?
So, how exactly did they actually inscribe the Arabic into a lot of these gravestones? 'Cause I mean, were they American carvers and they just like
Oh, yeah.
put in the Arabic?
Yeah, but you know what they can do now with all these laser things? They can just program that in and it just cuts it. In the past, there was a person sitting there like this, and now it's just done automatically. That's why you can have these fantastic pictures, you know, you can take a picture in and say, "Could you put this picture on the stone?" They'll say, "Sure, no problem." And it'll turn out exactly the way it is in the photo.
Like kids' birthday cakes.
Yeah,
You can get, you know, like Star Wars images on the birthday cakes
whatever
now and
you want,
everything.
whatever you want. Yes?
So I'm wondering why you do this research. Like, what specifically is your interest?
Well, that's a good question. I grew up in graveyards. I grew up in a small town in the southern tip of Illinois, and 2,000 people. And there was a graveyard where most of my family are buried, and my stone's going to be there. And every Memorial Day, which is what it was called back in those days, we would go and clean up the graves, and it was great. You know, the whole family would be there, my teachers would be there, everybody would be there, all my friends, and we would go around and they'd tell me stories about this person and that person, and people I'd never met. And so, to me, graveyards were exciting places. And then when I started dating my wife, we would go to graveyards because it was a cheap date. You didn't have to. And then when we started going overseas, we would, anywhere we were in a place, we would go. And I'm a member of the Graveyard Studies Association. It's hard to believe there's a whole secret cult of us out there, and we meet once a year, and they have a journal. And by the way, if anybody wants a copy of the article I've written on this, you can send me an email, and I will send it to you. It's got more than is here, rstock@umich.edu, and I'll be glad to send that to you. But at a certain point, I realized I had thousands of photographs, and I should do something with them because I'm going to die, and my kids will throw them away. And so I thought, what should I do? And I thought, okay, I'm going to deliver a lecture series, and then I'm going to deliver a lecture on this, public lecture on gravestones. And then I said to one of my friends, you know, you do graveyards too. Why don't we do 2 lectures? And then she said, oh, there's some others. So we organized a lecture series of 5 people speaking and publicized it. And we were amazed. We showed up the first night, and there were 100 people there. Graveyards are just electrifying. People just want to know about graveyards. And I had 5 students in there who were Muslims. I've written 2 articles, by the way, on my non-Muslim grave research. And I went to my hometown, that hometown graveyard, which has 800 and some graves in it, and I made a list of everybody in there. And then my wife said, you know, 600 of these have both birth and death dates. Why don't you create an Excel file and find out what happened? That graveyard had been started in 1840. So I did 16 years, let's see, is that right? So 16 decades. I did 16 decades of grave patterns. I had gender and I had birth and death dates. So I could see what the death pattern was across time. And I discovered that half of all the buried in the 1800s, half of all the graves in that graveyard were children under 10. And I discovered that there were probably 50 or so graves that were unmarked, and almost all of those would be babies. So I published an article on that. And after I finished this lecture series, I said if any student wants to get, I got special permission, if any student wants to get an hour of credit, they can attend all the lectures, write something on each of the lectures, and then do a paper on a graveyard. So 5 of my students were Muslims. And at the end of that time, I sat down with them and I said, you know what? You know more about graveyards than anybody else you will ever know. The next time you go to a graveyard, you're going to see things nobody else sees because you know what you're looking for. And I said, why don't we try to find every place in southeast Michigan where Muslims are buried? I knew 6 or 7 of them. But what about the rest? I knew they were out there somewhere. I just didn't know. So they set off. They became my data gatherers. And we came up with a list of, what did I tell you, 31 different places where they're buried. And I've just discovered 2 more. So that's how I got into this project. And then after a while, I had like over 1,000 slides of these graves. And I thought, I should do something with these. So I created a photo exhibit. And it's been exhibited now in 4 different places. And I started lecturing on it, and then I wrote an academic article, and I got another academic article I'm writing, and the rest is history.
So how do different Muslim subgroups vary in terms of do Sunnis buried with the Shias, or do they have separate graveyards for each, for the Tashis and Shias? And
People are really mixed. I mentioned Imam Karub. He created not only a mosque, which is in Dearborn, but he created a section right across from the mosque. There's the biggest graveyard in southeast Michigan, 200,000 plus graves. He designated a part of that. His mosque is called American Muslim Society. That's what it's called. So there's a section called AMS1, and that's for Sunnis. That was the first designated Sunni gravesite that I am aware of. And so those people are Sunnis. But then, about 20 years or 25 years ago, they kind of filled up. And so just down the road within the graveyard, they created what's called AMS2. It's like World War II. It wasn't there was no World War I until it was World War II, right? So they created now AMS1 and AMS2. And so that's mixed. Sunni, Shia, they're all mixed in together there. And that's where you saw the Chinese, and you got a lot of those flat stones, the big flat stones. And some of those stones have a little curlicue around them so that they look like a prayer rug. They resemble a prayer rug. I didn't show you any of those, but you'll see that little marker around frills on the edge that make it look like a prayer rug. So, but I would say people are mixed together. You look at the Albanians, they're all mixed together. Albanian Christians, Albanian Muslims, they're all mixed together. Sunni, Shia. Pardon me?
But their race is still the same. They're all Albanians.
Yeah, but what's interesting is the Muslim teaching is that you can be buried in a community graveyard. There's only one graveyard in all of southeast Michigan which is designated. It's a Muslim graveyard. It's run by Muslims for Muslims, so that's that. The plots for tots, anybody can be buried there. You can be a Christian, you can be Jewish, anybody can be buried there. And but the traditional Islamic teaching is very similar to the traditional Jewish teaching, that you could be buried in a public place as long as there's a designated separation. That can be a hedge, or it can be a little path, or it can be anything that separates you from others. And so that's the custom that some people follow. But if you look at the Albanians, they're all mixed together, Christians, Muslims. As I said, they were Albanians before they were anything else. They were Albanians before they were Christians, they were Albanians before they were Muslims, they were Albanians before they were Bektashi, whatever. And so for them, being Albanian is more important than anything else.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you
so
very
much.
much.